The bright side of addiction is recovery. And recovery is living proof. Hi, everybody. If you're new to our podcast, we welcome you. And if you've been here before, welcome back. And if you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or simply want to know more about the recovery process, this is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope. We carry the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured an historic interview with singer Judy Collins, also singer-songwriter Peter Yarrow, Broadway legend Ben Vereen, sportscaster and TV host Pat O'Brien. All these and more, lots of regular people too who are in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, their path. In this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, we're going to visit with a man from Charlotte, North Carolina, who is in long-term recovery, 42 years to be exact, who is, by his own admission, living on borrowed time. Here's a quick clip from my chat with Charles Odell.
I remember the first time I sat down in an open meeting and I heard somebody start talking, and although the circumstances were slightly different, I could identify with the emotions. You know, as they say, I felt like somebody had been reading my mail. I began to identify. I really think that was the beginning of my recovery, because some of those walls of denial started crumbling a bit. Addiction is a disease of isolation, and I began to reconnect with people, and that was very healing. I don't even think, looking back at it, that I knew that was what was happening, but it was.
My conversation with Charles Odell will be coming up in just a matter of minutes, and we will conclude today's podcast with some wonderful words of wisdom from the great award-winning actor Dick Van Dyke, a man in long-term recovery. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. A reminder, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. We'd love to hear from you. And before we continue, I want to remind listeners that September is National Recovery Month, with an incredible number of events and activities in every single state, most major areas. Check out what's happening in your area where you live and participate in the community of recovery. It's fun to celebrate recovery. You can find all the information about National Recovery Month at a great website, a great organization, Faces and Voices of Recovery, one word, .org, a great and inclusive organization. You can also find some great information at the government site, which is samhsa.gov, that's samhsa.gov/recovery-month. It's a great time for all of us to stand up and celebrate recovery. By the way, I'll be down in Texas this month speaking at the 50th Annual Conference of TAP, the Texas Association of Addiction Professionals. I will also be broadcasting interviews with speakers and attendees for Recovery Coast to Coast, which you will hear on future episodes. If you would like me to come and speak at your addiction conference or maybe a recovery community event, please get in touch directly with me at Neil Scott, NEILSCOTT at iHeartMedia.com, or Neil Scott Seattle at Comcast.net. I have a number of talks, including the power of recovery and resiliency in recovery, and a vast collection of stories about the addiction movement over the last 50 years. I'd love to share some stories with you and your audience as well, and record an episode of Recovery Coast to Coast from your event. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. Now, Newsweek magazine just released their listings for the top treatment programs in America for 2024. And most surprisingly, Sundown M Ranch is one of them. They're listed in the Newsweek 2024 list of America's top treatment providers. They were also rightly listed in the Addiction Information Directory. That's a vetted list from NAATP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. Sundown M Ranch is a not-for-profit treatment program. Their bottom line? Individual long-term recovery. It's not a financial bottom line. It's a personal bottom line, which is their constant goal. Sundown M Ranch is situated on 30 acres at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon in Washington State. They take pride in their decades-long reputation of assisting individuals and family members through the difficult process of going into treatment. They do it with compassion, respect, and confidentiality, the utmost confidentiality. So today, some 55 years after they opened their program in 1968, they remain among the most affordable treatment facilities in the country. If you're looking for a good, solid, abstinence-based, 12-step centered treatment program, consider Sundown M Ranch. I've been referring patients to Sundown for, most of those 55 years that they've been around. The real beauty of Sundown M Ranch is not the serene location, it's the amazing staff, many of whom went through treatment themselves at Sundown. It is truly a recovery family. Check out the website, sundown.org, for more information and take a look-see at their facility, sundown.org/gallery. Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. It is coffee time. I invite you to join me, if you would, as I introduce you to a grateful man in long-term recovery. His name is Charles Odell. His life spiraled out of control many, many years ago. He went to and flunked out of 5 universities and colleges. He went through treatment 3 times. The 3rd time proved to be the recovery charm. He even died at one point and was brought back by doctors. He's an amazing guy. He's got an amazing and inspirational story of resilience and recovery. Here is my conversation with Charles Odell, recorded in Denver at the recent National Addiction Leadership Conference. Welcome back once again, Neil Scott at Recovery Coast to Coast. We are on the road. We are in Denver, Colorado with a great group of people. I come here every year and meet new people and talk to old friends. NAATP is an amazing organization, National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. Joining us in this segment is Charles Odell. He's the Chief Executive Officer and the President of the Dilworth Center in Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's it, Queen City of the Carolinas.
How long have you been down there, Charles?
Well, I'm a native Charlottean. I've actually worked at Dilworth Center for, I have to think about it for a minute, 30 years. It's been 30 years now.
Good to see you up and around.
Yeah, it's good to be here,
Tell me about your background. You're in recovery.
I am in recovery. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'll be picking up, good Lord willing, a 42-year chip this year.
Newcomer.
Recovery's been really good for me, When I sobered up, I was essentially unemployable. I sobered up at age 26, and I found myself in a pretty awkward situation. I kind of felt like I was an adolescent in an adult body, and I didn't even have a job. But what
did you want to do when you grew up?
I didn't know.
Had no clue.
Actually, there's a period of time I didn't think I was ever going to grow up.
Wow, clueless in Charlotte.
That's it. It was a journey, but I experienced remarkable events in a treatment program I participated in the Charlotte area. It was called the Charlotte Treatment Center. It had been around since the 60s. Minnesota model program. Mm-hmm. I had a great experience there, and I found my recovery. And what I began to do is volunteer, and I wanted to get into opportunities to give back a little bit within the confines of these treatment centers, similar to what I experienced.
What brought you to the Charlotte Treatment Center? What were the events that said to Charles, you need to go into treatment?
I think I've heard Father Joe Martin one time say pain is God's gift to the alcoholic. He gave me an extra dose. There was a lot of things gone wrong. I had flunked out of 5 universities and colleges. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money, and I just didn't really have anywhere else to go. I didn't go to treatment to get well. I went to treatment initially because I really didn't have anywhere else to go. I was hurting. I was given the opportunity to go. My parents had stopped enabling me, but they said, if you go to treatment, we'll help you with that. I went that direction. It was like the path of least resistance.
What was it like in that first couple of weeks in treatment?
Well, I didn't sleep much. I was surrounded by people who I immediately began to identify with. I remember the first time I sat down in an open meeting and I heard somebody start talking, and although the circumstances were slightly different, I could identify with the emotions. You know, as they say, I felt like somebody had been reading my mail, you know?
Great
and
way to put it.
Yeah, and so I began to identify. I really think that was the beginning of my recovery, because some of those walls of denial started crumbling a bit. That was part of the first few weeks of treatment, but there was a lot of storming and norming going on. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. I didn't arrive to treatment in the best of shape. So I started getting some of those basics back in order, sleeping regularly, eating well, being around people. We used to say addiction is a disease of isolation, and I began to reconnect with people, and that was very healing. I don't even think, looking back at it, that I knew that was what was happening, but it was.
How long were you in treatment for?
6 weeks in an inpatient program, and then in those days they just sent you to once a week aftercare, and I participated in that for another 3 months.
What was it like leaving treatment after being so down and so devastated, and then finally going into treatment, and then now coming out into the quote unquote real world, and where the only thing that Charles needed to change was everything?
Everything I needed to change was everything. You're absolutely correct. In short, I was scared. I had established a support system. They had been taking us to recovery meetings. I had been connecting with people there, so I did not feel alone. But my history of staying sober at home was not good. And so when I left treatment, and part of it was this reentry process, going back to where I was before.
Yeah.
And so
same people, places, and things.
Yeah. I mean, I had to, they say no old playmates in playgrounds. I did that. I didn't hang out with my old friends. That made a big difference. I was making new friends. The other thing is I was going to lots of meetings. I was going to 2 or 3 a day, and I just kept doing that.
And you were working the program. There's a big difference between going to meetings and working the program.
That's exactly right. And I had a great sponsor. And I went to treatment. I didn't mention this to you, but I went to treatment 3 times. The experience, I'm telling you, was the third one I went to. Third time's a charm for me. Okay. But I remember when I left that first treatment center, there was a guy in there who was a counselor who had a connection in Charlotte. And he said, look, I want you to call this guy. His name was Walter. When you get back to Charlotte, he'll settle you in. And of course, I did not follow that suggestion. Fast forward 9 months, I was in the 3rd treatment center. I got out, I re-entered, and I said, I got to go up to this clubhouse. This is recovery clubhouse in Charlotte. And I walked in there, and they told me that what I had to do was hold out my hand, shake everybody's hand, introduce myself. So I didn't really want to do that, but I did it. You can't think your way into sober living. You live your way into sober thinking, right? So I went in there, and I stuck out my hand, and I shook this guy's hand, and I said, my name is Charles. And he looked at me, and he said, my name is Walter, and you're 9 damn months late. So anyway, I asked him to be my sponsor.
That is not a coincidence, but a God incidence.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. My life was full of that stuff.
Wow.
And the more I reflect on that, the more I notice that kind of stuff was happening all the time.
What does recovery mean to you today?
Well, it means a lot more than abstinent. That's part of it. I mean, you can't get sober if you're loaded. And changing drugs is like changing seats on the Titanic. Yeah. Your butt's going down. You got to get off the ship. So it begins with that for me. And the second part of it is connection with other people in recovery, and to be able to share with each other how we are practicing a program of recovery. And so a lot of it has to do with the program, attending meetings and suiting up and showing up and being there for other people. And it's not a spectator sport. I've been sober 41 years.
Wow.
Okay, I do
yeah.
this stuff today, just like I did the first year. I don't go to 3 meetings a day. I got a wife and I got a job now, right? So I can't family. Well, they're all grown and everything, but I still do the basic principles that I was taught by Walter, by the treatment program, and by my friends in recovery.
What is different for you today than 41 years ago when you came in?
Well, I've got a lot of experience under my belt now, you know. When I was drunk, I flunked out of 5 universities and colleges. Got 2 DWIs. I contracted hepatitis C from using dirty needles. I died once and was brought back. There were a lot of consequences. And so when I sobered up, those consequences kind of fell by the wayside, but I'd also found out that there were a lot of other things in life that I'd missed out on. So I got a good job. I went back to school, ended up getting a couple of degrees, a graduate degree in social work, which was kind of down my alley. My experience in recovery allowed me the tools to participate in life in terms of marriage, in terms of fatherhood. It's just been a very, very rich experience. I mean, I still feel to this day that every day is a gift. I've been living on borrowed time anyway, so anything from this point forward is gravy. But life has been very good, and I'm not done yet. You know, I'm a little bit older, but my health is good. I run a treatment center.
How did you get into the treatment field, Charles?
Well, you know, back in those days, Neil, the only thing you really needed to get a job in a treatment center was to be in recovery. And that's really where it started for me. I got a job as a monitor at a treatment center, which is a late night job, $10,500 a year salary with benefits.
In the big money.
Big money, you know. So I felt pretty good about all that. But it was one of those things where that job led to another opportunity, and then I got to the point where if I wanted to go perhaps beyond being a counselor, I was going to have to go back to school. And so I did that, and opportunities, as I say, presented themselves.
So you connected the dots.
Yeah, connected. And the dot, you know, it was laid out before me. I mean, we're all a product of the choices we make, I think. I had been in a period of time during my active addiction where my choices were not good. And so I think being grounded in a recovery program allowed me the opportunity to make wiser choices. And as the dots were connected, you know, my life came into focus in the way in which perhaps it was meant to be.
How long have you been at Dilworth?
I've been at Dilworth for 30 years.
Gee whiz.
Yeah, I worked in the field for 40 because I got my first job when I was 1 year sober. So I've been doing it for 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of changes.
I've seen a lot of changes. And, you know, for the most part, it's for the better. I think our field has become more disciplined. I don't like the cost of some of these treatment programs, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's a primary barrier to care for a lot of people.
It is. Absolutely.
And so I work for a nonprofit. We try to keep our rates down the best we can. I do a lot of fundraising, you know. We raise a lot of money for our scholarship fund. And I think it's kind of like throwing starfish back in the sea one at a time.
Yeah.
But at least some of them are going back. So
how many beds?
We are primarily an outpatient program.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, we do partner with local sober living facilities to mimic an inpatient experience. Most of my career prior to Dilworth, I was working in residential care services. We're an intensive outpatient program. We've got programs for adults, young adults, adolescents. We work with the Federal Aviation Administration. We have, I think, 3 or 4 pilots in treatment right now.
Wow.
We have an extended care program for nurses. The Board of Nursing in North Carolina requires their nurses to be in treatment for a year, so we provide that service. Have strong family programs. I think it's one of the best things we do. We don't charge anything for it.
What?
No charge for the family program. People can come for a year if they want to.
What does that entail?
Well, that's a good question. And I think just like treatment for individuals, families need education and support. We're big proponents of Al-Anon. We want them going to Al-Anon. And we got some black belt Al-Anons running that program.
I'm sure you do.
Again, that's a matter of connection and support as well.
Yeah.
And then we've got family programs for young children, ages 8 through 12. It's a fairly diverse set of clinical programming. Being a smaller organization, we're kind of nimble on our feet. If we feel like we need to change something, we'll change it. We implemented the NAATP outcomes measurement program a couple of years ago. You've probably been talking about that on your show. We survey everybody when they come into treatment multiple times during treatment, up to 2 years post-discharge as well, because we like to be able to show people that treatment works and that people get well. One of the big questions I've gotten forever is, what's your success rate? And that's kind of a muddy answer. It kind of depends on what do you mean by success. But if you mean by abstinence, you're maintaining sobriety. We can say up to 2 years post-discharge, 79 to 80% of our people are still sober.
Charles, that's amazing.
We can prove that, and I think that's
amazing.
That's one of the differences in our discipline, our industry now, that we are becoming more disciplined in conducting research, and to be able to prove not only to stakeholders and consumers, but to the medical community that we are a relevant form of medical care that saves lives every day.
Outstanding. You had a quote earlier from Father Martin.
Yeah.
And I worked with Father Martin for many years. Boy, I miss him.
I do too.
He was one of a kind.
I went up to Ashley not too long ago for a visit. I'd never been up there before. Of course, we've referred people up there for years. It's just such a wonderful, you can feel the presence of that. It's just a great place up there. That represents treatment at its best. I don't want to compliment Ashley to the extent that we just leave out everybody else, because there are obviously a lot of great players in this business. But I like to associate with these types of programs that are steeped in history and competence, and they attract great talent. That's the part of what I do that's exciting to me. I love the history of where we came from.
Absolutely. And, with Ashley, of course, they no longer use Father Martin's name. For me, that's a reasonable resentment.
Yeah, no, I
can't get over that. I'm sorry.
Hey, if it's okay with you, I'm going to still call it Father Martin's Ashley.
You and me both, Charles. Hey, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story, and keep doing all you're doing down in Charlotte for the many people who need your help.
Neil, thank you so much for your time.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Charles. To find out more about his program, Dilworth Treatment Center, visit Dilworth, DILWORTH, center, one word, .org. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, I'd love to hear from you. Our listeners would love to hear your story, regardless of the path that you've chosen, as long as you've been in continuous recovery for a year or more. Drop us a note, Recovery Coast to Coast, at Comcast.net. Coming up next, some recovery insight from the truly great actor Dick Van Dyke.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, some inspirational thoughts from a wonderful actor in long-term recovery, Dick Van Dyke.
An emotion ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it. Baruch Spinoza. We're always on the lookout for tools to help us live more comfortably. The most effective ones, we found, are often those that are uncomplicated and easy to apply. One such tried and true tool is to put our thoughts and feelings in writing. There are a lot of advantages to writing things out. For one thing, it helps us to better understand ourselves. When we put our thoughts and feelings on paper, we can sort them out and deal with them in an organized way, rather than trying to handle them as they float about haphazardly. Writing can be especially useful during trying times. Problems seem to return to normal size and fall into perspective when we write them down. Listing solutions, alternatives, and pros and cons enables us to visualize exactly what we have to work with. This brings us greater assurance and the ability to make informed choices. When we put our fears and resentments on paper, we set the stage for sharing them with another person. Once our feelings have become crystallized into actual words that we can see, it's much easier to articulate them. Of course, writing is also an important safety valve. It gives us a chance to vent our anger and to get rid of irrational thoughts before they get out of hand. Thought for today: negative feelings and thoughts are much more easily dissolved once they've been crystallized in writing.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, I invite you to share it with one other person. We'd appreciate it very much. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email address again is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. If you're considering treatment, by the way, for a friend or a loved one, or maybe even yourself, be sure and visit NAATP.org/AID. That stands for the Addiction Information Directory. It's an up-to-date list of those treatment programs that adhere to the strict ethical guidelines of treatment. One of them is Sundown M Ranch, but there are a lot of other good treatment programs available as well. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here is a 24-hour national helpline offering free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals are available as well, 1-800-622-HELP. And we encourage you to check out findsupport.gov. That's one word. It's a website designed for individuals, families, and friends, including information on how to pay for treatment, including low-cost and free treatment options. Find healthcare support, how to help someone else, or find help for yourself. It's all in one place. Findsupport.gov. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. And remember, September is National Recovery Month. Celebrate and hopefully get involved. All the information is at facesandvoicesofrecovery.org and at SAMHSA, SAMHSA.gov/recovery-month. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, to live in gratitude, and certainly to be kind to one another. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.